America's real borders aren't lines on a map. They're where the lights don't turn off. Take a look at the map of the United States. Clean, bright, state borders neatly drawn, clusters of cities. Now flip it. Dark mode. The colors drain away. The borders fade away. The states disappear into darkness. All that's left is black space and clusters of light. Dense, connected, and unbroken. From space, America doesn't look like 50 states. It looks like a handful of massive organisms, pulsing and alive, separated by a black void. Now zoom out. Spot anything? The dark areas stay dark, but the bright areas never turn off. Those glowing clusters aren't just cities. They're something bigger. They're megaregions. We've spent 200 years focused on the United States, but the reality on the ground is that the country has organized itself into 11 different megaregions. And these glowing webs of light are hiding a massive shift in power that is about to erase the state lines you grew up with. A megaregion isn't a single city. It isn't a suburban sprawl. It is a massive, continuous network of cities, suburbs, and infrastructure that functions as one shared economic system. Inside a megaregion, millions of people live, work, and move across dozens of cities as if they were neighborhoods of the same place. The defining feature is integration. These areas share labor markets, transportation systems, supply chains, power grids, water supplies, and digital infrastructure. A person might live in one city, work in another, and depend on services that are spread across an entire region. Megaregions form when distance essentially collapses. Travel time drops, communication becomes a constant, separate cities begin to merge into one. Over time, they stop competing with each other and begin operating together. That's the key difference. Cities compete. Megaregions cooperate not through choice, but by necessity. If you take a look at the map, you'll see that the 11 zones only take a small fraction of America's landmass, less than 20%, but they hold over 70% of the population. They generate more than 75% of the wealth. These are the places where the lights never turn off, the zones that have taken over the rest of the country. If you don't live in one of these clusters now, the chances are you will by 2040. They're swallowing up the country's talent, money, and political power. The empty spaces are just a dark backdrop. The growth of these 11 regions is constant and aggressive, pushing the limits of just how much space a single urban area can take up. Look at the Northeast for an example, a 500-mile-long stretch called BosWash. It's a massive glowing path that starts in the forests of Maine and doesn't stop until it slams into northern Virginia. 53 million people are packed together in this cluster, more than the entire population of Spain. It functions as the global headquarters for the money on Wall Street to the power in DC. You can ride a train for hours and almost never lose sight of a skyscraper. And it's not the only one. Look west to see how the Great Lakes region has changed. It used to be an old factory belt. Now it's a massive industrial heartland. It links Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. But it doesn't stop at the border. It is economically fused with Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. It's a cross-border giant of water-heavy industry and shipping. This connection to Canada shows that megaregions do not just ignore state lines, they ignore national borders too. Near Pittsburgh, the lights of the Great Lakes are beginning to brush up against the western edge of the Northeast. It's the birth of a mega region. While the North is about being crowded and having history, the New South and the West are about to explode. These areas are moving so fast that the maps can barely keep up. The Texas Triangle pins the points of Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio, with Austin sitting in the middle. It holds over 20 million people and is growing faster than almost any other zone. It functions like its own country within a state, a powerhouse of space travel, energy, and computer chips. Along the Pacific, Southern California has moved beyond Hollywood. It's a 25 million person gateway for global trade, stretching from the San Diego border up through LA and Santa Barbara. It's increasingly bleeding eastward into the Nevada desert towards Las Vegas. It's the busiest shipping gateway in the Western Hemisphere. The amount of goods flowing through these ports is enough to supply the entire continent with everything it needs. And if you like these map dives, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Megaregions keep growing, and so should this channel. Further north, Northern California has become the global brain center. Centering on the San Francisco Bay Area and spilling all the way into Sacramento, this is the capital of artificial intelligence and tech. It's a region defined by the closeness of its talent. The rest of the country is forming into chains of development that link different industries together. These chains act like a safety net, ensuring that if one city struggles, the others can pull it back up. The Florida Corridor is a chain link of development connecting Miami's finance hub to the tourism magnets of Orlando and the space tech of the Atlantic coast. The Piedmont Atlantic is the engine of the New South. It's a banking and research path that stretches from Atlanta through Charlotte and up to the Research Triangle in Raleigh-Durham. The Gulf Coast is an energy and chemical heart that runs from Houston through New Orleans to Mobile. These are high-speed loops of human activity that never stop moving. But this wasn't part of some grand master plan. It wasn't dreamed up in the 50s as part of a boardroom brainstorm. It was a messy, natural change driven by geography, money, and a constant need for speed. To understand how we got here, we have to look at the shocks that pulled these cities together in the first place. Back in 1790, the idea of a megaregion would seem like a dream. Back then, cities weren't connected. They were pretty isolated. If you lived in Philadelphia, New York City might as well have been on the moon. A trip between the two took days of bumpy carriage rides over muddy paths. The first megaregion wasn't born from politics. It was born from infrastructure. First came water. The Erie Canal in 1825 didn't just move grain, it locked New York City's future to the Midwest. Then came the railroad, turning days into hours and shrinking entire regions into a single economic system. And after World War II, the real megaregion boom began with the arrival of the car. Because in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act unleashed 41,000 miles of high-speed roads, and suddenly the in-between exploded. Before the interstate, you lived where you worked. After it, suburbia spread outward. Commuting stretched farther, and cities stopped acting like isolated hubs and started behaving like one connected machine. Each of these inventions didn't just connect cities, they made them dependent on each other. And once that happens, the map stops being about borders and starts being about pressure. This created the suburban takeover. As people moved out of the crowded city centers to find a yard and a white picket fence, the cities began to spread outward. Look at a map of the Great Lakes or the Northeast from this era. The empty space between Philadelphia and Trenton, or between Chicago and Milwaukee, began to fill with houses, shopping malls, and gas stations. The highways turned these regions into long, continuous paths of movement. The cities were no longer separate dots. They were a single blurred line, one that would keep growing. While the North was sticking together through highways, the South and West were changed forever by the invention of indoor cooling. Before the 1950s, places like Phoenix, Miami, and Houston were seasonal. They were too hot, too swampy, or too harsh for huge year-round populations. Air conditioning sparked one of the largest moves in United States history. Without the ability to control the temperature inside, the modern South would simply not exist. Millions left the Great Lakes Rust Belt for the Sun Belt, fueling the fast rise of new megaregions like the Texas Triangle, the Florida Corridor, and the Arizona Sun Corridor. Now we're in an even bigger shift: digital expansion. We've gone from the commuter to the mega worker, where hybrid work stretches the practical work radius from about 30 miles to between 100 and 150 miles. The result is simple. People can live further away, but their money, jobs, and daily life are still tied to the same regional economy. This is why towns like Princeton, Texas, or the outskirts of Sacramento, California are seeing record growth. They're being swallowed by the megaregion's pull. A software engineer for a company in Austin might live 2 hours away in the hill country, but they're still spending their money in the Texas Triangle. They still use the Austin airport. They're still part of that regional living organism. Because of these shocks, the 11 megaregions have become like giant economic vacuums. They're not just growing, they're sucking the lifeblood out of the rest of the country. These regions are more connected like chains. If one link breaks, the rest feel it. But there's even bigger problems now: the brain drain loop. Megaregions offer the highest pay and the best networking. The smartest young people from rural areas move there. Companies follow because that's where the talent is. The megaregion gets even wealthier, pulling in even more talent. The 11 megaregions are now solid blocks of power. They're self-sustaining. But if these 11 megaregions are so powerful, if they have the money, the tech, and the hunger to expand, why haven't they merged? Why is the entire United States not just one continuous glow of light from New York to San Francisco? They've hit a problem that even money can't fix. Let's take a look at NASA's Black Marble satellite image. Between those 11 glowing islands of humanity lie vast, dark gaps. These aren't just empty spots, they're active physical barriers, no-go zones for urban growth. The Front Range megaregion, anchored by Denver and Colorado Springs, is currently one of the fastest-growing spots in the country. It's wealthy, it's high-tech, and expanding. But to its west sits the massive, rocky back of the Rockies. No matter how much money is in Denver, it can't pave over a mountain peak. The lack of flat land and the brutal winters mean that the Front Range will never join with Cascadia or Northern California. Nature has drawn a hard line in the dirt. The Rockies ensure that the West remains a collection of outposts rather than a single linked web. Another invisible but powerful blockage is the rain cliff that begins at the 100th meridian. If you look at a population map, there is a clear vertical cliff that runs right down the center of the country. To the east of this line, the lights are crowded. To the west, the map goes dark. This is where the rain stops. Water is the one thing no city can survive without, and the West simply doesn't have enough of it. Everything east of this line gets enough moisture from the Gulf of America, formerly the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic to support massive, sprawling populations. West of this line, you enter the high plains. Without multi-billion-dollar water projects, the land simply can't support a megaregion. You can drive for 8 hours through Nebraska or Kansas and never hit a cluster large enough to be called mega. In the Southwest, the desert acts as a natural moat that prevents the different hubs from ever touching. The Southern California megaregion and the Arizona Sun Corridor are separated by only a few hundred miles of mostly flat land. But those miles are some of the most hostile on Earth. The Mojave and Sonoran deserts act as a physical off-switch for urban sprawl. The heat is so intense that it creates a barrier more effective than any fence. Sure, high-speed trains will eventually bridge this gap, but the desert makes sure that there will never be a continuous strip from LA to Phoenix. The lack of water is a hard ceiling on how far these regions can spread. The Appalachian Mountains act as a smaller but still very effective speed bump for development in the east. While these mountains aren't as tall as the Rockies, the terrain is thick, the valleys are narrow, and the soil is rugged. In the 1700s, they stopped the pioneers. Today, they stop the mega-joining. The land forces our roads, our power lines, and rails into narrow paths. This is why, despite being relatively close, the financial powerhouse of New York and the banking hub of Charlotte remain two distinct units. The mountains act as a friction point, slowing down the movement of people and keeping the two regions from fusing into one giant East Coast super region. Then there's the Mississippi River, the lifeblood of American trade, but it's also a massive divider. The floodplains surrounding the river are some of the most fertile on the planet. The wetland of the Mississippi Basin creates an empty spot between the Great Lakes and the Piedmont Atlantic. The river demands its space, and humans have learned the hard way not to build too close. Nature has effectively reserved this land for farming. You can't build a 50-story skyscraper on a delta that wants to be underwater every 10 years. This creates a natural greenbelt that keeps the industrial north and the suburban south separated. If you live in Cascadia, your life is defined by the Pacific and the forests. If you live in the Texas Triangle, your life is defined by the heat and the prairie. Each island develops its own way of thinking based on the land it sits upon. Geography isn't just stopping the takeover, it's shaping the personality of each region. But what happens when the megaregions reach their limit? The cities have become like giant magnets for money and talent, but this success is starting a silent war that could leave half the country behind. Each megaregion is fighting for the most valuable resource on the planet, Human talent. This is a fight for the future where the prize is the smartest people and the most innovative ideas. In this new landscape, if you aren't growing, you're being consumed. And this takeover has a dark side. The promise of a bigger stage, specialized venture capital, and a bigger paycheck is too much for most to turn down. As the best and brightest depart towns and smaller cities, they leave behind communities that are not just older and poorer, but stripped of the very people required to solve those problems. The data shows a clear two-speed America. While the megaregions see a surge, the areas in between face a terminal population crisis. This creates a devastating loop. As people leave, businesses follow, which further empties out the local economy. This leaves many small towns wondering if they have a future at all, or if they're destined to become ghost zones. The growth of these regions across state lines has led to the rise of mega-governance. Because the mega-region's economy doesn't care about the border between New Jersey and New York, or Indiana and Illinois, the people running these areas are beginning to bypass state capitals altogether. They're forming super agreements to manage the massive systems, water, power, and transit that keep the region alive. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast shows how states are starting to act like regional blocks, managing carbon across the BosWash corridor. Transportation is moving the same way. In the Texas Triangle, private developers are pushing for high-speed rail that could link Dallas and Houston in 90 minutes, turning the two cities into a single economic unit. And hybrid work is accelerating the shift. More people are moving into the deep suburbs while staying tied to the same mega-regional economy, creating stronger regional identities. People are defining themselves by their cluster instead of their state. But a sudden shift is about to force millions of people to move back to the north. By 2050, the maps of the 20th century will be collectibles. The takeover will be complete. America will no longer be a nation that has megaregions. It will be a nation that is a collection of 11 super-linked megaregions separated by a vast, automated service zone. Technology will have built high-speed bridges over the gaps that once kept us apart. We're already seeing the first signs. High-speed rail and self-driving transport paths are turning travel into a high-speed event. When you can move from a quiet home in the desert to a boardroom in Los Angeles faster than you can currently drive across town, the two regions effectively fuse into one economic area. The rise of everywhere AI means that the megaregions pull will extend into the digital world. We're already seeing a two-tier geography. You might physically live in a small town in the Appalachian Gap, but if your digital life is anchored in the Northeast Corridor, you're a resident of that megaregion. This digital takeover allows the areas to harvest the work of the entire continent without needing to pave it over. Perhaps the most shocking shift on the 2050 map will be the Great Northern Pivot. For a century, the story of America was go south and west for the sun. But as the heat in the Sunbelt reaches levels that challenge infrastructure, and as sea levels threaten the Florida and Gulf Coast paths, a massive move back north is beginning. The Great Lakes megaregion is being rebranded as the climate haven of the 21st century. With access to 20% of the world's fresh surface water, cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Buffalo are seeing a massive boom in population. This time, it's built on water security. In 2050, the Great Lakes may once again be the most vital megaregion in the country, the hydro powerhouse of a thirsty nation. As the takeover finishes, the empty spots between the 11 islands will become high-tech service zones. These areas won't be wastelands. Instead, they'll be automated landscapes of self-driving tractors, wind farms, and carbon-trapping forests, the engine room of the megaregions. There will be very few people living there, but it'll be the most watched and productive land on Earth. When you look at the black marble satellite view in 2050, the 11 glowing webs will be brighter and more linked than ever. The old state lines will be invisible because they no longer matter. The real power lies in the regional boards that manage the water, power, and data of the islands. America is no longer a map of 50 states. It's 11 glowing engines of human activity, stretching from sea to shining sea. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on Map Pack.